Hajime!
Yes, gentlemen, yours truly, General Lance, and his trusty Sergeant Barnes has been requisitioned to oversee the coming military sports, or rather, basically military Olympics. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's actually this function called the Military World Games. And it's a multi-sport event, blah blah blah, but it's basically the Olympics that are waged in all the different military events, with the exception of freaking badminton. Who the heck is watching freaking badminton in a military games? Absurd. Unacceptable, okay? No way. But there's a ton of different events which are exclusively... Fuck. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm drinking my whiskey here. Sergeant Barnes and I, we're on our lawn chairs on top of the Alps right now, and we're drinking some whiskey to warm up. As you can imagine, I'm looking at the different peaks. You should see the Alps in the Swiss mountain range. Just absolute shards of the earth penetrating up into the sky. The most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. I remember having driven there through once before, and going through this tunnel, this massive tunnel that links France with Italy, and it was just this massive, great, whole Faustian project that goes through this just solid stone that's like a shard. If you boys are from the Americas, like if you go to the Rockies, it's something similar, but on steroids. It's incredible. And the spaces between these like very pyramid-like structures are so confined and small. It makes you wonder how Hannibal did it. If you've ever looked at the Alps, and if you've ever driven, even on its southern coast between France, like Nice to Genoa, it's like hard, man. And the shoreline, the shoreline of northern Italy and southern France is like a cliff. So it makes you wonder how it is that they were able to not simply move a body of troops through these narrow ravines, but also imagine elephants or carts and all the other camp followers and all this good stuff. And these are things that Sergeant Barnes and I always think about. As a military leader, you should always be thinking of your position, where the enemy can attack, where you can move friendly forces, and centers of gravity of terrain, right? But no, in all seriousness, going back to this multi-sport event, right? We have to understand what is the purpose of sports in general, and how was it originally waged. So, I mean, we talk about the Olympics, but the Olympics have become basically the same crap, right? The same BS, where it's waged by professionals, basically mercenaries, who specialize in one thing. And though, of course, it's true that in the military professional sports, they specialize in one thing, what circumscribes the skill of all these different military functions is that they're all soldiers first. And so, therefore, ideally, or I mean, it's not even ideally, I mean, functionally speaking, all these people have to be fully functional military men, right? And therefore, it disallows what's called min-maxing, okay? So what is min-maxing? It's basically choosing to super specialize in one tiny function to the detriment of everything else. Whereas the warrior is the total human being. They're totally fit. They have a profession. They have this and that, and then they're experts at this or that, or archery, or modern pentathlons, or whatever it may be. So it is not merely that they're autists or savants at one thing. It is a total human being, and that is the function of sport, right? The sport should be choosing amongst men who are multifaceted and who take the gold anyway. Okay? Does that make sense? Like, the difference is the civilian, he could spend his entire life learning how to be a marathon runner, but have you seen marathon runners? They're so freaking frail. There's no way you could put a pack on their back or they could hold a 240 for a freaking 30-mile march. They can't do that. Okay? It's absurd. It's just ridiculous. And so ultimately you have to remember that the purpose of a competition is its military application, in the sense that it selects from military men the most excellent. That's the entire point. This whole savant crap, or this private teams who are, professional soccer players or something, or football players, is absurd. Okay? It's not sport alone that makes you successful at war. It's on top of everything else that it helps you in the military endeavors. Okay? It's actually really cool. If I could just give you a couple cool things that the military World Games actually does, it's between, that I found interesting. On top of all the, for instance, the aeronautical pentathlon, the military pentathlon, the naval pentathlon, which are forms of military sports which continue, there's squad level events, and they are supposed to do a number of different mission tasks, orientations, and stuff, and whoever completes it first to the highest degree wins, right? But there's other cool stuff, like, for instance, equestrianism and triathlons, modern pentathlons. There's also in the winter games, because there's summer and winter games, there's like military patrol on skis. There's like sport climbing, so mountain climbing, which has obviously military effects or applications. Cross-country skiing, same thing. I don't know if you know this or not, but the Marine Corps has actually a permanent unit based in Norway and Greenland, where they regularly do exercises on cross-country skiing and cross-country snowshoeing, which is orders of magnitude harder than anything you could imagine. So I would like to popularize this, bully side your peers into watching the military world sports and nothing else, okay? Nothing else. None of that crap. But going back, there's a reason why sports are so important. And we talk about the challenges of our time and why it is that the culture of our time is so negative, or it's just a lack of the same vivacity and spirit and dynamism that you see in the ancient Greeks, right? Unfortunately, we can't really talk about the Romans, because the Romans didn't really create anything of their own. Their genius was in the STEM, right? Just as Nietzsche would say, their genius was in engineering, in basically making things work, governance, which I, as you probably can tell, love the Romans. But the Greeks truly understood how to make culture. And it wasn't necessarily just narrowly focused on, military government applications as the Romans were. And we have to give credit where it's due. For as much as the Romans did not create their own culture, they certainly curated a number of it, right? So, for instance, a lot of Greek philosophy was preserved and popularized because of the Roman domination, and throughout the Roman Empire was infused into the body politic, right, as a zeit. And so it's why Rome was so important. But the Greeks were the ones who actually made it. And so what is the mechanism of a healthy political entity's cultural flourishing, right? Because if you look in America, it's just a bunch of freaking ugly, disgusting pieces of architecture, people, art. Could you even call it art? It's just absurd, right? And we don't even understand what is the central premise of art. What is the central premise of this and that? And the reason why there's so much variance, why there's so much, let's say, it's like TV static, so much stuff clashes, and whatever is erected is in poor taste. Have you seen the Obama World Library? It looks like a dildo in the sky. What the heck's going on here? If you go to London or if you go to like different countries that like have a lot of modern architecture, like for instance, a lot of you think Paris is beautiful, but if you actually been to Paris, it's ringed with this absolute disgusting scar of industrial brutalist buildings, and in the center at the Louvre, there's this disgusting pyramid. If you ever watched freaking the Da Vinci Code, it kind of showcases it perfectly. And the Detective Fauch, very cool guy by the way, Detective Fauch actually makes a very salient comment that it's a scar on the face of Paris, and it's absolutely correct. Absolutely disgusting innovation. I think it's disgusting. But why is it that we're not able to discern what is the good from the bad? I mean, this comes from the anarchy of values, right? This comes from equality, right? Because when one is equal, metaphysically all claims are equal, and therefore it is impossible to actually give a hierarchy of values. It's impossible to therefore give a hierarchy of taste, a hierarchy of spirit and socialization, right? So if you go to Vienna, which is a very beautiful city in my opinion, though it's very much like a living museum, unfortunately, this is something the futurists spoke about in the 1920s. It is definitely like a vision into the past, a vision into what could be. And I think it's important that you understand I'm not an antiquarian, right? And an antiquarian, the difference between an antiquarian and a vitalist is that antiquarians think that it's good because it's old, right? But at this point, there are many old things that I believe we should discard. So it's not inherently because something is old that we should preserve it. Therefore, what is the actual meter or metric by which we judge something to be exalted, right? And it has to do with natural excellence, a pitch and intensity of natural excellence and taste. That is to say, a superior specimen, a superior taste, a superior form of art, a superior man. And there's this great book, which we will actually be reading a couple of different excerpts from at length, by Eunice Tonsell, which is Agon and Nietzsche. And though it, of course, comments on Nietzsche specifically, it talks about the Greek Agonal spirit, the actual engine of Greek cultural proliferation and excellence. In the West, due to Platonism and its modern rendition of Christianity, right? Because Christianity built off the foundations metaphysically of Plato, and then later, of course, the secular version of Christianity, which is to say a kind of double derivation of Plato, which is liberalism, right? Universal individuality and liberalism, universal state, and so on. We have lost the value of competition. Competition at once during the original city-states and the Homeric Greeks, for instance, focused primarily on the competition and this concept of active justice, that he who wins is best and is just, which is contrary to the idea of Plato, right? Plato believes that there's an absolute sense of the good, and therefore there's an absolute sense of the just, and therefore it can't be ever competed, it can only be right or wrong, which is something Christianity and all the other Abrahamic religions post-Judaism, right? So not the Jewish religion because it's different, but for instance Islam and Christianity and their derivations, and you'd see this in Nestorianism and so on, is that true belief, correct belief, becomes the emphasis as opposed to the competitive active justice of competition, which is to say, not in a low sense, but a high sense that might makes right, right? And this doesn't mean being an ogre, I'm correct in this argument because I basically bashed you on the head like a caveman, okay? No. What it means is, in the specific locus of competition, so for instance, let's say philosophical debate, that he who is able to posit the most beautiful, the most coherent, and the most correct idea is, or sorry, not even correct, most beautiful and most enthralling idea, best conveyed, well articulated, is he who is true, as opposed to the Christian or Neoplatonist concept, which is it doesn't matter whether or not you articulated an idea correctly. What matters is if you're correct. And so you could be the dumbest person on the planet, but if you say 2 plus 2 equals 4, you are correct. And if a math professor or something makes a mistake and says 2 plus 2 equals 5, he is incorrect. Now, obviously, this is not to say that there isn't a positive or negative function. Each schema has its strength and it has its weaknesses. In a purely rationalist, basic, mechanistic understanding of life, as Plato would posit, it makes the world better suited for science and the rational mechanic of life. However, it doesn't get at the Dionysian, right? And the Dionysian function is something that can't be rationally deduced. It has to be irrationally intuited. And intuition, right? Intuition is something that is judged actively. It is judged in real time, and the victory is primarily an artistic event. Even a battle between two heroes, the judge, right? So in the Greek Agon, there was the onlookers, spectators, there were the competitors, and there were the judges. The judges weren't just simply taking into account the rules and the strictures and the culture of sportsmanship around the Agon, but they were also judging on whether or not how beautifully someone won. I know this sounds strange to us, but just as I had said before in various different transmissions about the Greek ideal of kalos kagathos, which is not simply someone who is the best at any given, let's say, pursuit, but they were also the one who did it most effortlessly, most beautifully. And so it's the pitch or unity of these themes that actually renders one victor. Okay? It reveals him to be the victor as opposed to anything else. So it's a form of revealed truth, okay? So, you know, when two boxers fight, it's a revelation of the truth by competition as opposed to a preordained, conceived idea of victory as through rationalism, right? And we can see, because, and this is why I like the Greeks, is because this primacy of the will can overcome great odds. The will can overcome many of the different material rationalist dialectics that would otherwise say that this is true or false. And these are the shortcomings of rationality, is that in real life, for instance, if you study physics, there are no absolute truths. There are no absolute rules. And so rationality is simply an imperfect tool getting at something far deeper, which is a mechanism that culture alone can actually achieve, okay? Culture alone, that intuition, that para-rational mechanism, the agent soul, is only able to actually profoundly conquer within the human existence, really. And so this is something that we, I believe, have to return to. And in many ways, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, was an attempt to return to classical times, specifically Greek times. Attempts to actually get back into what was the most beautiful and best in this time. However, they had a shortfall because their leveraging of classical history was primarily focused on the Socratics, right? This rationality, you know, if you see in Descartes, and then of course the metaphysical unity of all man, which you see in Rousseau and Voltaire and blah blah blah. These people are disgusting bugmen, okay? Don't even freaking come at me with any of these people. I hate them, okay? De Maistre was right, or De Maistre, whatever his freaking French-ass name was. But in all reality, though, here is the time and place. You and I, we sit in this year, Anno Domini, okay? You're a cuck if you say otherwise. I'm not even Christian, but it's called Anno Domini, okay? 2025. We will be talking about these things, okay? I hate rationality because remember, this is the issue. This is the issue is that human existence is fundamentally irrational. It's super rational, which is the correct term, right? Because there's a lot of baggage with that term, irrational. Irrational. It's bullshit, okay? It's super rational. It's actually better than rationality, because rationality is such a blunt instrument, and it is only good for so many things until it has shortcomings, okay? And therefore, we're seeing this cultural downstream effect of the shortcomings of rationality. It doesn't get at the human existence because the human existence isn't basely mechanistic in that way, okay? And moreover, I would say something much else, is that Plato, I mean, the concept of the noble lie, like, he was telling on himself. He was saying, this is a con. This is a bullshit con. You believe in this, so that way we can make the rest of the polity into a unity to be headed by people who are fundamentally irrational. The philosopher king is not someone who holds rationality as the highest good. It's simply a con for everyone else to derive a greater strength. See how they attack me? I'm freaking burping and they're attacking my throat. This is what happens. Fucking commies. Anyway, going back to talk about the Agon, to talk about how we can revivify our culture, our soul, our spirit, is to talk about the primary mechanism of the Greeks, which is to say competition, which is to believe in the supra-rational conviction of beauty and the justice of an active disputation, right? The justice of revealed truth, as opposed to rational preconceptions or some kind of mechanistic understanding of the reality. This is why I really can't read freaking Kant. I mean, even he based as an axiom his philosophy of the irrational conviction, right? I mean, even these most autistic, spurgy, systems creating type individuals like the Socratics and so on, and Descartes and blah blah, all these people had to fundamentally think. They had to be before they could actually create, and therefore betray the irrational schema of their weird, cold, clockwork philosophy that they try to effuse and impose on others, okay? The truth is that the world is run by will, and it's about the conflicts of wills, and who wins is he who should be just, or rather, who is just, and should be winner, okay? The gods reveal in competition. But I give too much away. To talk about the Agon, and to revivify our Politeia nowadays, and to signal the cultural overcoming of this base and pathetic slave morality of you know, the derivations of Plato, because Plato wasn't a slave, okay? Plato was actually a good con man. He just conned, and then unfortunately his con got taken up by another con, who was a great con artist, born 2,000 years ago. Anyway, going back. So we're talking from this book, Agon and Nietzsche, Thomas Unsel, or rather, Eunice Tunsel, and it talks about Agon and war, and the interplay between, and the actual ethos surrounding the Agonal culture. Okay, we're going to go back here. Reading now. There are several reasons why the culture of competition and the culture of war-making in ancient Greece bear certain affinities to one another. We can say at the outset that they were adjacent cults, but were not the same. Many gods and heroes who were revered at the Pan-Hellenic sites, such as Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Apollo, and Heracles, have skills of prowess and have proven themselves to be strong in wars and fights, even if they, unlike Ares and Nike, Nike, right, is the goddess of victory, okay? Not to be confused with the shoe company, all right? It's Nike, the goddess of victory, who the shoe company, unfortunately, tastelessly desecrates the name of. But anyway, going back. May not have a direct relationship to the war culture. The erection of statues of Ares and Agon side by side at Olympia, as reported by Pausanias, is symbolic of the intimate bond between war and competition in ancient Greece. In addition, many of the warriors of the Homeric saga are at the same time contestants and athletic victors. On the other side of the picture, one comes across many athletes who devoted their lives to training and the games of contest, but who were at the same time warriors. One such athlete was Ulysses. I can't even pronounce these Greek names, so please forgive. Ulysses of Eretria, who was killed in a battle with the Persians during the Ionian Revolt. Another one was the famous athlete from Croton, Phelleus, who is said to have skipped the Olympics to fight against the Persians in 480 BC. Now, pause. Remember what I had said earlier. This is why, and will be revealed in due course, why it's important that the foundation of man be fundamentally military, okay, and that the sports are a way of honing military skill. You're going to see why professionalism is such a con, and it destroys the emphasis of war making for personal monetary gain and glory that's hollow, okay? That's what I think it is. Hollow. These are hollow, effete, pathetic, sports ball brained freaking individuals, you know? I'm not even going to go into that word because I'm not trying to get messed up here by the commies, whatever. But anyway, going back. Competitive games, in a direct or indirect way, can also be seen as war games. Enemies pitted against one another to fight almost unto death. See? However, unlike many modern sports, and unlike how they're fought in wars, ancient Greeks did not compete in groups, but rather as individuals. At least that is how it was in the periodikos. Nonetheless, this does not negate the direct or indirect connection between Agon and war. A connection that exists at several levels. First, all competitive games demanded a rigorous training and discipline, which made them physically fit and ready for war. Second, some games of the periodikos, such as the horse race, chariot race, javelin, and discus throwing, and the race in armor, had a direct affinity to war making. And finally, some games like wrestling, boxing, and the pankration were given the leading edge to the athlete warrior in hand-to-hand combat. Lastly, Plato treats training. Oh, see how they get at me? Do you see this? Yeah, they attack me. Anyway, going back. Lastly, Plato treats training and contest games as essential for the army of a strong and a just state. And this is the excerpt from Plato now. And since this is so, its members must train themselves for warfare, not in actual time of war, but during the life of peace. Hence the wise state will be under arms not less than 1 day in each month, and as many more as its magistrates may think good. Without regard to stress of weather, cold or hot, men, women, children will to take to the field in one body, when the magistrates so ordain, at other times in sections. They must also devise a round of noble sports, with their accompanying sacrifices, so as to provide feastal combats which shall reproduce real warfare with all possible truth to life. Pause. Now, this is important, right? Training should be as how you fight. You fight as you train as you fight. And this is something that Colonel Hackworth, a big admirer of, right, talks about, that basically training must be as close to the real thing as possible. And this is what Plato is getting at. Regardless of weather, so that way you culture yourself to adverse conditions, that you will still be victorious even under such straining and difficult situations as extremely hot or extremely cold weather. Especially if you can imagine under a combat load, whether back then or today. This is why athletes of today are completely absurd and disgusting. They have to wait for clear conditions, okay? It's pathetic. War doesn't wait for you to be ready. War, the enemy, does not wait for you for a perfect sunny day, okay? It strikes when it wants to. It strikes when you're asleep, when you're tired, when you're cold, when you're hot, when you're dehydrated, when your buddy dies. strikes then, not when you're ready. Give me a frickin' break. Going back. Here Plato considers contest games as a means to be ready for war, and later in the dialogue the Athenian speaker gives the rationale for it. Then I suppose we may next make a general observation about all athletic contests. Those which provide a training for war should be encouraged and prizes instituted for success in them. Those which do not may be dismissed. Which these are it will be better to make matter for explicit statement and legislation from the very first. To begin with, I apprehend there should be such institution of prizes for fleetness of foot and rapidity of movement in general. Okay, end comment. So this is the end of Plato's excerpt. Remember, this is from two of the books of Plato, specifically from Laws. The first one is from Book 8. It's lines 828d to 829c. And the second one from the same book, from the same chapter 8, right? Book 8, Laws. But it's 832. Why is it that it's important to be fleet of foot, which means to be fast? Why is it important to be constantly moving? Because war is constantly moving. War is either marching or active and decisive action, which, remember, it's, remember like E equals mc squared, right, from physics, right? Energy equals mass times acceleration. Well, in war, it follows the same kind of physical dynamism, right? The idea that he who is most strong with the most mass and the most aggressive force wins. And so fleetness of foot allows maneuverability. It allows obviously higher morale because you're not going to be as fatigued in training because you're training for it, right? And so therefore when you attack, you will have all the breath you need to be able to push forward, push home the advantage of maneuver and victory. Find, fix, flank, finish, right? So anyway, going back now. What follows next in the text is a list of sports heavily on the side of military training, in which the contests will take place. In the Republic also, the guardians of the state should receive athletic training first, before they go through their educational process and be ready for war making. Plato's main interest, however, whether in the Laws or in the Republic, is state-making and not contest in and of itself. So, okay, pause. You have to understand, Plato is talking about political philosophy, and so he's not necessarily concerned with culture making. Why? Well, at least in these parts of the text, because he is focused on something which is quickly eroding in his time, right? If you had listened to my previous transmission regarding the Dr. Alamuriu's dissertation about Plato. Plato is more concerned about the ebb of Greek civilization, the Greek polity, which rewards excellence. He is concerned with anti-democratic machinations, right? He's concerned about the democratizing effects of Greek life. And so his concern is elsewhere, right? He's trying to buttress his claim against this. He's trying to give a philosophical framework which counters or overcomes the democratic project. That's his concern. But our concern is the following, is that we have found out how to stratify society. However, we have fallen culturally, spiritually, to the democratizing effect, which is the leveling effect. What is most mediocre in man wins in our society, and culture suffocates under that. And so therefore, we here are commenting on Nietzsche, the great Greek, silently birthed into existence 2,000 years later, right? Or rather, I think 1,800 years later. But, the proverb stays, okay? Good to go? Anyway, going back. All of these points of contact notwithstanding, the culture of contest and the culture of war were not the same in ancient Greece. Contest was rather a transfiguration of war, as Nietzsche sees it in the wisdom of Heraclitus, Homer, and Hesiod. This transfiguration is evident among many other elements. In the high estimation of contest, its elevation to a cult status and deification, and the establishment of truce during the games. A sacred truce was announced by truce bearers, spondophoroi and envoys, theoroi, which lasted about a month to cover the period when the athletes and all the participants traveled to and from Alice and competed at Olympia. This allowed not only the athletes and trainers, but also all the spectators to travel safely. Violators of the sacred truce were punished. Finally, the proximity of the spirit of war and the spirit of Agon, or rather their chiasmatic relation, allows Nietzsche to move back and forth from the symbolism of one to the other. Which follows are some agonistic contests or contexts for Nietzsche's use of the term Krieg, which is German for war. Now we're going to move ahead, right? And so in the text there's a subtitle. Complacency or happiness as antithetical to the spirit of strife, right? Agon, right? So remember that Nietzsche has this very specific direction that he's trying to get to, and Eunice, whatever, has a good little footnote to talk about Nietzsche's disposition, and I'm reading from him now. It's a footnote. For Nietzsche, there is conflict, destruction, cruelty, and suffering in existence. One must accept it as such and create joyfully without denying or repressing it. Any world interpretation or ethics which does not take this into account is problematic, not to mention the fact that Nietzsche always critiques any prescriptive and foundational approach to the question of ethics and morality in the prospective sense. The former expects blind following and uncreative copying, whereas the latter holds on to one absolute truth for all. So, what he means by this is, of course, the idea that, it's like pre-structured morality and ways of being, as opposed to rising to the occasion, adapting to it, and overcoming, right? Because remember that life itself is conflict, destruction, cruelty, suffering. So it's two things, right? It's dynamic. Life is dynamic. It's ever changing. Secondarily, it is painful, right? And if you remember this common argument, if God good, why hurt, right? As if it's some kind of indictment against a god or the gods or a principle as such, or the quality of life. People say that life is terrible because it hurts. Oh my god, it hurts, so therefore it's not good. What a bunch of cowards. Pain is the deepest feeling you'll ever have in your life. Pain for a purpose is the most sublime, and it's overcoming the triumph of will over pain, over obscurity, over adversity, over justice itself. Is justice itself, okay? I don't know if it made sense to you or not. You could put it in the notes in the legionary transmission, but that's what I'm trying to get at here, okay? Anyway, we skipped through the text because he talks about some stuff that's irrelevant. Life is short, and so let's get back into the point. Let's get back on the op, okay? Throughout his works, Nietzsche critiques various theories of happiness from eudaimonism to utilitarianism. However different they may be, needless to say, there is only happiness of the individual and its maximization as the utilitarian sought, but other issues such as suffering, what one does with suffering, collectivity, culture, and so on, which are at stake. Any philosophy or world contemplation which does not take suffering into account for Nietzsche is problematic. The balance between joy and suffering remains one of his teachings throughout his works. Moreover, any prescriptive ethics which, with a list of virtues, promises well-being to the individual is problematic to Nietzsche, since there is no one set of virtues or excellences true for all and true at every context. In his worldview, well-being, which includes suffering as well, must be arrived at with strife in whatever steps it may take, small or big. In other words, great works are to be appropriated creatively in specific context. So, have you guys ever had like a high school teacher or one of these near retirement age coworkers or people, family members who had a job and they're getting old, they're in constant pain, and the effort of going to work
and practicing whatever trade or vocation or pursuit of life they pursue becomes too great for their personal body, or at least their mind. And so they retire. And shortly thereafter, let's say 2 or 3 years later, they are a decrepit being. And some people say that this is a reflection of just the overall arc of their bodily disintegration, degeneration. I think this is incorrect, and it bears out in psychological research, psychosomatic research, that those who engage in activities which are challenging have a longer longevity of life, which is why physical fitness is correlated highly with overall health and longevity of life throughout an individual's life, right? Existence. And so therefore, it comes to reveal a truth that your cognition, your body, requires adversity, and implied in adversity is pain. And there is no adversity without pain. At least there is no true adversity without pain. And therefore, it would suggest that the true life is one which is overwhelmingly painful and is studded with periods of euphoria or moments of euphoric triumph, but it is the baseline is adversity, it is pain, it is suffering, and it's overcoming, right? And therefore, you have to understand that the life that we live in now, this life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, it's about being happy. I want to be happy. I don't want to cry anymore. I'm a little baby. I want you to take care of me. Bullshit. It's a fucking lie. In fact, it is more deadly to succumb to the sweet saccharine false idols of comfort-seeking behavior, happiness, than it is to pursue adversity and pain and suffering and great projects with great obstacles to overcome. No one gives a damn about freaking happiness or comfort. Not really. At least not the best ones of us. Honestly, I'm really tired of this whole comfort-seeking behavior. No wonder why our society is run by women. Pathetic. Effete and pathetic. Now, back to the text here. We're going to talk about suffering. We're going to continue to develop the specific excerpt here. Continuing. What I call complacency at the outset, based on the spirit of Nietzsche's text, has many facets. One of them appears, in quotation, above as the desire to end the war that one is, or the conflict between opposite drives and value standards, which come from multiple origins. The desire of the weaker type is to have one drive, or one value standard, to rule over all others and consequently have no inner conflict within. Nietzsche sees this trend in the Epicurean type who wishes to attain the tranquility of the mind, or the Christian desire to find peace in resting place as in God, a final unity as the single origin and purpose of all existence. However, he juxtaposes another type next to the weaker one, the origin of which he traces to the same opposition of drives, although the two types handle opposition differently. And this is Nietzsche. But when the opposition and war in such a nature have the effect of one more charm and incentive to life, and if, moreover, in addition to his powerful and irreconcilable drives, a real mastery and subtlety, finesse or elegance, in waging war against oneself, in other words, self-control, self-mastery in quotations, self-outwitting, has been inherited or cultivated too, then those magical, incomprehensible, and unfathomable ones arise, those enigmatic men predestined for victory and seduction, whose most beautiful expression is found in Alcibiades and Caesar, in quotations now, to whose company I should like to add the first European after my taste, the Hohenstaufen Frederick II, end quotation. And, among artists, perhaps Leonardo da Vinci. They appear in precisely the same ages when the weaker type, with its desire for rest, comes to the fore. Both types belong together and owe their origin to the same causes. Now we're back to the original author. Now in the second type, there is the same war, but there is a different way of relating to this war. The war is accepted as such because it makes life more charming. He sustains the irreconcilability of warring drives in himself, that is, there is no desire to end the war. In addition to the fact that the type lives the war of these drives in its burning intensity, if he cultivates self-mastery and self-outwitting, then he has the victory on his side. A victory in the arena of greatness, a victory in the contest of great individuals. Let us now look into this type further. Self-mastery is the ability to set limits, to draw boundaries, and to resist. This second type does not give in either to the anxiety that the conflict of drives produces, or to the supremacy of one drive or others. He would rather keep the fight going and be charmed by the ever-growing change that he sees in himself. It is this anxiety that opens up new possibilities for him. The pieces are now in one constellation, now in another. He achieves self-mastery by waging a war against himself. Subtlety or finesse implies style. The strong nature gives style to the mastery of drives. What does this mean? This type does not repress the fight of drives. On the contrary, gives a vent to their conflict, but also gives a context, a shape to this conflict. That is, he does not play out this conflict just in any situation, but rather where there is a context for it. End quote. Just to parse this text that I just read, what he means is the following, and this is an allusion to the former, in where man, over time, right, we have been unfortunately hurled into a casteless, classless society. And what this causes on a genealogical, genetic level is a confusion of origins and peoples, where once there were classes like the warriors, or the merchants, or the farmers, or the kings, and so on, and the priests. Now everyone's mixed with everyone, and so within himself, right? And Jung talks about this, that our soul is a forest of our ancestors, each of which are a chorus of its origins. And so yes, there is absolutely a virtue into separating these people and orienting them in the proper way. In fact, this is my aim. However, considering the position where we are now, today, and the genetic inheritance of our forefathers and our forebearers, because both maternal and paternal, I think it's important for you to understand that to overcome ourselves, to achieve self-mastery, requires our ability to negotiate our instincts within and leverage them towards action, towards self-overcoming, towards victory, right? So there may be impulses within yourself which are at odds with another impulse, right, which cause you to have conflict. But you need to be good at either deceiving or transfiguring this instinct into something that catalyzes action, effective action. And this is what Tunsel is talking about. He has a weird name, so I apologize for constantly fucking up his name, but it is what it is. Tunsel talks about this. And here's the last section of this transmission, in which we'll kind of cap our transmission for today, or lecture for today. Anyway, going back. On war and warriors, right? Thus spoke Zarathustra. Many readers have read this chapter in Zarathustra as the words of a warmongering philosopher. That's correct. That's right. Nietzsche's the ultimate chud. Anyway, going back. While Nietzsche's rhetorical skill and his desire to eliminate soft-hearted readers are pushed aside, however, many layers in the text betray such an easy, on-the-surface reading, not to mention the complicated relationship between Zarathustra and his brothers in war. No commander in war calls his soldiers his best enemy. Already a different type of relationship in a different spirit than that of war, understood in the usual sense, is established at the outset. The text, on the other hand, bears many affinities to the spirit of agonism. Below, I will explore them in 6 points. First, let's examine Zarathustra's relationship to his brothers and his best enemies. Since Zarathustra says he is, and he was, of their kind, we can assume that he is an experienced warrior. In Agonal terminology, he is a contestant, which he says, I am also your best enemy, but may also be a trainer, a judge, or a priest of contest. It is clear that he speaks from an elevated standpoint, which is reflected in, so let me tell you the truth. The trainer urges his disciples to excel in contests. Of course, after a rigorous training process, the judge demands that the contestants compete and play according to the rules of fair game, and the priest executes the rituals, including those of sacrifice. Most of the passage reads as Zarathustra's attempt to invigorate and provoke his brothers in war to fight, which is what a trainer does, as he expects his disciples to strive and win. It is the judge in Zarathustra who says, I love you thoroughly, as he holds the function of sustaining all contestants together under fair game. Lastly, the priest demands sacrifice and expenditure. What warrior wants to be spared? I do not spare you. So just pause, right? So this is the spirit of tough love. What I've been trying to talk about for the longest time. Some of you, unfortunately, and of the many of the slaves in general, believe that love is about being kind, being nice. But love and kindness, that of that sort, only goes so far, because life is brutal and hard, and therefore you must treat them brutally, or even more brutally than reality, so that their training, their spiritual and psychological and physical training, overcomes life's adversities, life's adversaries. This is what Nietzsche is getting at. This is what he's telling you. He's telling you to be hard with yourselves and with each other, and to impel one another to competition and to good-natured fights, to build up the strength in yourselves through adversity, through oneself, with one's peers. So that way you're habituated to conflict, so much so, in a way, in contradistinction to the many who are not, and therefore when you come out of that training environment, that agonal culture, you go out into the real world and crush them and make the world your own. Do you see? Now do you see? Second, the feelings of hatred and envy are agonistic feelings. I know of the hatred and envy of your hearts. One hates one's enemy, in the right dose, to have the fuel to fight against him in the heat of struggle. Without this, there will be no struggle. It is important to understand hate in the Empedoclean sense of strife rather than in a personal sense. It is not an ordinary hate that Zarathustra expects his disciples to have. And one cannot despise the enemy. To despise means to prejudge the enemy as weak, and hence to underestimate the enemy before the contest, which is a huge mistake, by the way. Never underestimate the enemy. Moreover, the contestants must envy the prize of victory, former victors, heroes, and gods, who stand above victors and contestants as exemplary models of contests. They must also be great enough not to be ashamed of hatred and envy. But why does Zarathustra say, you are not great enough to know hatred and envy? Well, because they are still contestants who have these feelings and have not yet overcome them for a higher state, such as that of a trainer, a judge, or a hero of contest. If they move to a higher state, they become greater and need not have hatred for the enemy or envy for their prize in their hearts. I think this is pretty self-evident, but I guess maybe it's something that unfortunately our society has tried to do away with, hatred and envy. Hatred is a powerful force. Hatred allows you to catalyze action against an adversary. There's a reason why they're trying to undermine the spirit of hate in your mind, in your heart. It's because they're trying to basically unequip you for war, disequip you for war. if I might coin that term, right? Disequip you from war. They're trying to disarm you, right? And envy. Envy is a sentiment which some people interpret as wanting what others have, right? But envy also has this other function. Envy having the function of valuing a possession / capability of an adversary in this context. And so what that means is that you will take its power seriously and therefore prevent you from underestimating your enemy. Does that make sense? So you can't have contempt, because contempt creates underestimation, and underestimation, as we know, leads to disaster on the battlefield, and the battlefield of life. Anyway, going back. Third, not peace but struggle, or a peace for struggle, is what Zarathustra teaches. Here, peace may stand for the period when one prepares for victory, which would be training. You should love peace as a means to new wars. But peace can also be that period when one trains in struggle. There are always small contests that lead to bigger ones. This can be the meaning of let your peace be a victory. If we combine the two, the result is that life is a perpetual struggle of small and big contests, and there are only short interludes of peace in between. Short peace more than the long. Here, Zarathustra contrasts work, Arbeite, and struggle, Kampf. To you, I do not recommend work, but struggle. It is not bonistic, useful drudge work that the contestant engages in. Remember, bonistic, I can't even say this word. Banalsic is a term that refers to basically drudge work, but also like commonplace 9 to 5 petty detail, that kind of thing, basically of a shopkeeper or some other effeminate and effete vocation. Going back, but rather the toil of struggle, a different kind of work. Zarathustra uses work again in the second sense. Let your work be a struggle. So basically, if you are to engage in work, or if you are to engage in some kind of non-kinetic fight, physical fight, as we would commonly understand it, let it be grand. Let it be something overcoming. Don't be a petty engineer, be a great one. Go to Mars with your technology, right? Like Elon's sense. Have great dreams and strive to realize them. That's really the gist of this little part. We're getting to the end here, so bear with me, legionaries. Fourth, struggle for victory, where victory and struggle are emblematic of Agon. Struggle is the process, and victory is a moment at the end of every contest that seals the struggle. However, the spirit of victory, Nike, as ancient Greeks called it, cannot be separated from the spirit of struggle, like a period at the end of a sentence. Let your peace be a victory could also mean that the contestant has to learn, as part of his training, how to handle being victorious. So basically being a good sport. Anyway, not so interesting. Next point. Fifth, courage is needed to compete, not pity. One must have courage to face up to one's worthy enemy. It is a feeling that one must have in the right dose, in its own context, as Aristotle proposes. Less courage would make one a coward, and more would lead to foolhardiness. In such a state of appropriate courageousness, one esteems oneself and one's enemy. One does not pity or love one's enemy in contest, because pity demeans the enemy and removes dignity from him, and love weakens the spirit of contest. Again, you can't hate what you love, right? Or you can't love what you hate. The judge of the Agon must love all the contestants to sustain a fair game, but the contestants do not need to love insofar as they are contestants. And so this is interesting because ultimately it is about basically finding a golden mean in courage, as Aristotle would say, but also the lack of pity, something, a sick, disgusting slave moralism from Christianity that we have been infected. Do not pity. Do not reward weakness. Do not feed the wildlife, Reward the strong and the virtuous and those who actually win. We only defeat weakness by destroying it, not by rewarding it. That's what pity is. Pity is basically succoring the snake that bites you. Anyway, going back. And finally, the sixth point has to do with sacrifice. Every struggle needs sacrifice, either in the monological sense or in a collective sense for each contest game. In the first sense, contestants must expend their energies to surpass their opponents and themselves, in offering a part of themselves to their highest thought, that is, the overhuman, at least as a command from Zarathustra, which is also their highest hope. They excel and become higher beings. On the other hand, the community of contestants needs to sacrifice as well. Here, the loss or the death of contestants becomes sacrifice as a collective offering. What matters long life? What warrior wants to be spared? I do not spare you. I love you thoroughly, my brothers in war. End quote. So this is interesting. The last part is actually the most evocative part, right? Selflessness, ability to make the object of your longing and your conquest to be everything, and to give everything possible in its attainment. I don't know if you ever watched this movie, 127 Hours, where this guy, he's going basically cross-country extreme running, he falls in a chasm, a boulder basically pins his arm against a wall, and he's stuck there for a very long time, and he ultimately has to cut off his own arm with a razor blade, so that way he's able to be free and live. But for you, and for small-souled people, would see this as a tragedy in the most base sense. It's bad. Oh my God, he had to cut his arm off. But I see this in the Agonal sense as self-overcoming. It showed within him that he was the victor of that contest, that conflict, that adversity. That he was able to literally cut through the nerves of his bone while he was awake with a small blade and finally free himself. He overcame himself. He overcame his pain, overcame the weakness that most would succumb to. And there he is. That is his story over the 127 hours, right? A lot of you think it's BS, maybe the weak of you, but I think you legionaries who know my heart, you know that's beautiful. And so too is that for the military application, right? The military ethos of sacrifice. Sacrifice not simply for one's brothers or one's mission, but a sacrifice in the adversity of oneself. Because for as much as the world out there may influence us, the ultimate battle is the battle within. And it is that mechanism, that attitude, selflessness, courage, excellence, honor, that is how we will remake our city-state and rule the world and the stars. But without further ado, legionaries, this is Sergeant Barnes, General Lance, Politeia, signing off.